The distant whistle of the westbound train echoed through the valley as Catherine Vaughn stood in the doorway of her homestead, the golden light of sunset casting long shadows across the weathered porch. 3 years had passed since that fateful day when Thomas Flynn rode out, promising to return before the first winter snow. 3 years since she'd watched him hang his prized Stetson on the oak peg by the door, the last gesture of a man who believed he'd be back soon enough to claim it. The year was 1877, and the Montana Territory still held both promise and peril in equal measure. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she approached the hat, dust motes dancing in the amber rays that sliced through the cabin windows. She lifted her hand, hesitating briefly before her fingers made contact with the brim, gently wiping away the accumulated dust with care and quiet respect. "He ain't coming back, Kathy," her brother had told her countless times. But something in her heart refused to believe it, refused to accept that Thomas had simply vanished into the wild expanse of the frontier. The hat remained as a silent sentinel, a promise unfulfilled, until today. Catherine had received word, a crumpled letter delivered by a passing traveler, that changed everything. Thomas Flynn was alive. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a hint of autumn already coloring the distant mountains. Catherine packed what little she could carry, securing the homestead as best she could. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but determination set her jaw in a hard line as she mounted her mare. "We're going to find him, Willow," she whispered to the horse, patting its chestnut neck. "Whatever it takes." With one last glance at the hat still hanging on its peg, Catherine rode away from the only home she'd known since marrying Thomas at 18. Now, at 23, she was embarking on a journey that might well end in heartbreak, but she couldn't live with not knowing. The small town of Silver Creek lay 3 days' ride to the west. According to the letter, Thomas had been seen there, working as a ranch hand for a cattle baron named Everett Harrison. Why he hadn't returned home, why he hadn't sent word in 3 years, Catherine couldn't fathom, but she intended to find out. The first day's ride passed uneventfully, the familiar landscape gradually giving way to unfamiliar territory. Catherine made camp beside a small creek, the night sounds of the wilderness keeping her company as she stared into the flames of her modest fire. "You always said I was too stubborn for my own good, Thomas," she murmured, fingering the simple gold band on her left hand. "I reckon you're about to find out just how stubborn I can be." The second day brought rain, a relentless downpour that soaked through Catherine's clothes and dampened her spirits. She sought shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, huddled against Willow for warmth. It was during this dismal interlude that she first encountered Cole Wilson, a drifter with kind eyes and a voice that reminded her of simpler times. He appeared suddenly, leading a mud-spattered gelding toward the same shelter. "Pardon me, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Mind if I join you until this deluge passes?" Catherine assessed him warily. Life on the frontier had taught her caution, but something about his open expression put her at ease. "Be my guest," she replied, shifting to make room. "Not much sense in us both getting soaked." Cole tethered his horse beside Willow and settled a respectful distance away. "Mighty unusual to see a lady traveling alone in these parts," he observed, not unkindly. "I'm looking for someone," Catherine said simply, unwilling to share more with a stranger. "Aren't we all?" Cole replied cryptically and said nothing more on the subject. They passed the afternoon in sporadic conversation, learning that they shared a destination, Silver Creek, though for different purposes. Cole was delivering papers for a lawyer in Helena, a job that kept him constantly on the move. "Been all over the territory," he explained, "and half of Wyoming besides. Know just about every town and watering hole worth knowing." Catherine's interest was piqued. "You know Silver Creek well then?" "Well enough," Cole nodded. "Small place, but growing since the Harrison outfit set up operations nearby. Old man Harrison's been buying up every acre he can get his hands on, bringing in workers from as far as Texas." Catherine's heart quickened. "You know of the Harrison Ranch, the people who work there?" Cole gave her a curious look. "Some. Why?" "I'm looking for my husband," Catherine admitted after a moment's hesitation. "Thomas Flynn, I have reason to believe he's working for Harrison. Something flickered across Cole's face, recognition, perhaps, or concern, but it vanished so quickly Catherine wondered if she'd imagined it. Flynn, he repeated slowly. Can't say I recall the name, but Harrison employs dozens of men, easy enough to miss one. The rain eventually slackened, and they continued their journeys separately, though their paths would inevitably converge in Silver Creek. Catherine couldn't explain why she felt both relief and disappointment as she watched Cole Wilson ride away. The third day of travel brought Catherine within sight of Silver Creek, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Cattle dotted the surrounding grasslands, a visible sign of Harrison's prosperity. She entered town as the afternoon waned, the main street bustling with the usual activities of a frontier settlement. Cowboys and townspeople mingled outside the saloon. A general store displayed goods beneath a striped awning, and a small church stood sentinel at the far end of the street. Catherine drew curious glances as she rode slowly past. Women traveling alone were uncommon enough to merit attention, especially one as striking as she was with her copper hair and determined bearing. The local boarding house, a two-story structure with a wide porch, offered modest accommodations. Mrs. Abigail Potter, the proprietress, was a widow with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. One room, one bed, meals included for 50 cents a day, she informed Catherine briskly. No gentlemen callers, no noise after 9, and payment in advance. Catherine handed over 3 days' worth of coins. I won't be causing any trouble, Mrs. Potter. I'm looking for someone, my husband. He works for the Harrison Ranch. Mrs. Potter's expression softened slightly. Harrison's men come to town on Saturdays mostly. That's tomorrow. You might find your man then. Thank you, Catherine replied, following the older woman upstairs to a small but clean room overlooking the main street. Once alone, Catherine unpacked her meager belongings and stood at the window, watching the town's activity below. Somewhere nearby was Thomas, the man who had captured her heart 6 years ago, who had built their homestead with his own hands, whose laugh could warm her on the coldest winter night. The man who had vanished without explanation, leaving only his hat behind. That night sleep eluded her. Questions circled like restless crows. Why hadn't Thomas come home? Was he unable to return or unwilling? Had his feelings changed? Had he found another life, perhaps another woman? Morning brought no answers, only renewed determination. Catherine dressed with care in her best dress, a modest blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and ventured downstairs for breakfast. The dining room was occupied by several other guests, including, to her surprise, Cole Wilson. He rose politely as she entered. Mrs. Flynn, he greeted her. I see we've both found our way to Mrs. Potter's hospitality. Mr. Wilson, she acknowledged with a nod, taking a seat at his table when he offered. Have you completed your business in town already? Not quite, he replied, pouring her a cup of coffee from the pot on the table. The lawyer I'm looking for won't be back until Monday. Seems I'm at leisure until then. Catherine sipped the strong coffee gratefully. Then perhaps you might help me. You know the town and I don't. Where would ranch hands typically gather on their day off? Cole considered her question while buttering a biscuit. The Silverbuck Saloon for drinking and cards, the Mercantile for supplies, church for some, though that's usually just families. He paused. Mrs. Flynn, I hope you don't think me forward, but I'm concerned about your plan. Silver Creek can be rough on Saturdays when the ranch hands come in. It's no place for a lady alone. Catherine's chin lifted slightly. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Wilson, but I've come too far to be deterred by propriety. At least allow me to accompany you, Cole offered. As a fellow traveler with time to spare, I'd be happy to help you locate your husband. Catherine hesitated. Cole Wilson was a stranger, yet he'd been nothing but courteous. Having a companion might indeed make her search easier and safer. Very well, she agreed finally. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. They spent the morning walking through town, Cole pointing out establishments of note while Catherine scanned every face they passed. By noon, the streets had grown more crowded as workers from outlying ranches, Harrison's among them, began to arrive for their weekly recreation. The Silverbuck Saloon seemed the most logical place to start. Catherine stood outside, gathering her courage as piano music and raucous laughter spilled through the swinging doors. Ladies don't typically enter through the front, Cole advised. There's a side entrance that's more appropriate. Catherine nodded gratefully, and they made their way around the building. The side door opened into a smaller room adjacent to the main saloon, where a few tables were occupied by men playing cards or enjoying quiet conversations. Cole found them seats with a good view of the main room, ordering coffee for Catherine and whiskey for himself. From this vantage point, she could observe most of the saloon's patrons without being too conspicuous. For nearly an hour they sat in companionable silence, watching as cowboys came and went. Catherine's eyes scanned each face with desperate hope, but Thomas wasn't among them. "Maybe he's not coming to town today," she said finally, disappointment evident in her voice. "Or maybe the information I received was wrong." Cole studied her with sympathy. "How long has it been since you've seen him?" 3 years, Catherine answered softly. "He left to deliver a herd to Wyoming, said he'd be back before the first snow." Her fingers twisted the wedding band she still wore. "His hat still hangs by our door exactly where he left it. I've kept it dusted, waiting for him to claim it." Cole's expression was unreadable. 3 years is a long time, Mrs. Flynn." "Yes," she agreed. "Too long for a man who promised to return." A commotion at the front of the saloon drew their attention. A group of men entering, laughing boisterously. They wore the dust of the range and the confidence of men who worked hard and played harder. "Harrison's men," Cole confirmed, noticing Catherine's interest. "You can tell by the brand on their horses, see them through the window, the Flying H." Catherine rose slightly to get a better view of the newcomers, her heart pounding. There were perhaps a dozen of them, crowding around the bar, calling for drinks, slapping each other's backs in camaraderie. And then she saw him. Thomas Flynn stood slightly apart from the others, leaner than she remembered but unmistakable with his sandy hair and the way he carried himself. He was alive, he was here. Catherine's legs nearly gave way. Cole steadied her with a hand at her elbow, concern evident on his face. "Mrs. Flynn, are you all right?" "It's him," she whispered. "It's Thomas." Cole followed her gaze, his expression shifting subtly. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," Catherine replied, indignation momentarily overcoming her shock. "He's my husband." She started forward, but Cole's hand on her arm restrained her gently. "Wait," he cautioned. "Before you approach him, there's something you should understand about Harrison's operation." Catherine turned impatient eyes toward him. "What could possibly matter now? My husband is alive, Mr. Wilson. After 3 years of wondering, of fearing the worst, he's alive, and I intend to speak with him." "Please," Cole insisted, his voice low and urgent, "give me 5 minutes of your time. After that, I won't stop you." Something in his tone gave Catherine pause. She sank back into her chair, eyes still fixed on Thomas, who was now engaged in conversation with another ranch hand. 5 minutes, she conceded. Cole leaned closer, speaking just loud enough for her to hear over the saloon's noise. "Everett Harrison isn't just a cattle baron. He's ruthless in his business dealings and his methods of keeping men in his employ. Some of his hands came to him voluntarily, but others—" He paused. "Others were brought in under circumstances they couldn't control." Catherine's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "Debt," Cole explained grimly. "Gambling debts, mostly. Harrison will pay off a man's debts in exchange for labor at terms that make it nearly impossible to work off what's owed. It's not quite indentured servitude, but it's uncomfortably close." Catherine's eyes widened as comprehension dawned. "Are you suggesting that Thomas—" "I don't know your husband's situation," Cole interrupted gently. "But I've seen men trapped in Harrison's employ for years, unable to leave, unable to contact their families for fear of bringing Harrison's attention to those they love." That's criminal," Catherine breathed, looking again at Thomas with new understanding. He looked tired, she realized. Worn in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "It's carefully legal," Cole corrected. "Harrison has judges and lawmen in his pocket across 3 territories. Men who try to leave without paying their debt are charged with theft. Some end up in prison. Others simply disappear." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. "My God." Now you understand why I suggested caution, Cole said. If your husband is indeed working off a debt to Harrison, your presence could complicate matters, or it could help him, Catherine countered, her mind racing. We have land our homestead. It's not much, but it's ours, free and clear. If money is what's keeping him here, land might indeed be valuable collateral, Cole acknowledged. But approaching this situation requires delicacy. Harrison has men everywhere, including in this saloon, if they suspect Thomas is planning to leave. Catherine bit her lip, torn between the desperate need to rush to her husband and the wisdom of Cole's warning. What do you suggest? Let me make inquiries, Cole offered. Discreetly, I can learn more about your husband's situation without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, you should return to the boarding house where it's safer. Catherine shook her head firmly. I'm not leaving now that I've found him, but I'll be careful. Her eyes never left Thomas as she spoke. I need to know why he didn't come home, why he never sent word. Cole seemed about to argue further, but apparently thought better of it. Very well. But please let me approach him first, sound him out. If he is indeed trapped in Harrison's service, we'll need to proceed with extreme caution. Catherine reluctantly agreed, watching as Cole rose and made his way casually through the crowded saloon toward the bar. He positioned himself near Thomas, ordered a drink, and began what appeared to be idle conversation with the bartender. Minutes stretched like hours as Catherine observed from a distance. She saw Cole gradually include Thomas in the conversation, saw her husband's initial wariness give way to cautious engagement. There was no sign of recognition between them, nothing to suggest Thomas knew Cole or suspected his purpose. After what seemed an eternity, Cole returned to their table, his expression carefully neutral until he was seated beside her once more. Well, Catherine demanded in a whisper. You were right, he's Thomas Flynn, Cole confirmed. And my suspicions were correct as well. He's working off a debt to Harrison, a substantial one. From what I gathered, he had no choice but to accept Harrison's terms after losing everything in a card game in Wyoming. Thomas was never a gambler, Catherine protested. Maybe not before, Cole said gently. But according to him, he'd lost the cattle he was delivering and was desperate to recoup the loss. One bad hand led to another and he trailed off, not needing to elaborate. Catherine's world tilted. The Thomas she knew had been responsible, cautious with money. To think of him gambling away a herd their livelihood was almost inconceivable, yet here he was, working for Harrison instead of returning home. Did he mention a wife, a home? She could barely force the question past the tightness in her throat. Cole hesitated. He wears no ring, he said finally, and he didn't speak of family. The pain that lanced through Catherine's heart was physical in its intensity. I see. That doesn't mean he's forgotten you, Cole added quickly. Men in Harrison's employ learn to guard what's precious to them. Revealing attachments can be dangerous. Harrison isn't above using a man's loved ones as leverage. Catherine wanted desperately to believe this explanation, to find justification for the 3 years of silence. I need to speak with him, she said, rising from her chair. Alone. Cole looked as though he might object, then simply nodded. He's going to step outside for air in a few minutes. I suggested the alley behind the saloon would be quieter. I'll make sure no one follows him. Thank you, Catherine said, genuine gratitude in her voice. You've been kind beyond what any stranger might expect. We all need help sometimes, Mrs. Flynn, Cole replied with a faint smile. Go. Your husband will be waiting, even if he doesn't know it yet. Catherine slipped out the side door and made her way around to the back of the saloon. The alley was empty save for a few crates and barrels, the sounds from the street muffled by the surrounding buildings. She waited, heart pounding, rehearsing and discarding a dozen opening sentences. What did one say to a husband who had been absent for 3 years? What questions came first? What accusations? What declarations? The back door creaked open. Thomas stepped out, a cigarette between his fingers, looking up at the sky as he exhaled a stream of smoke. He hadn't smoked when they were together, another small change that made him both familiar and foreign. Thomas. The single word hung in the air between them. He froze, the cigarette dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Slowly, he turned toward her voice. Catherine. His voice was rough with disbelief. Is that really you? It's me, she confirmed, stepping forward into a shaft of light that fell between the buildings. Thomas stared as though he were seeing a ghost. His face had weathered, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A scar now marked his jawline, thin and white against his tanned skin. "How did you find me?" he asked, making no move to approach her. "A letter," Catherine replied. "From someone passing through Silver Creek. He recognized your name from when we lived in Cheyenne." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "You shouldn't have come." The words struck Catherine like a physical blow. "Shouldn't have come, Thomas, you disappeared. For 3 years, I've had no word, no way of knowing if you were alive or dead. Your hat still hangs where you left it. I've kept it dusted, waiting for you to come back for it." Emotion flickered across Thomas's face, pain, longing, and something that might have been shame. "I wanted to write," he said finally. "God knows I wanted to come home, but I couldn't. Because of Harrison, because of gambling debts." Catherine took another step closer. "Thomas, whatever happened, we could have faced it together. The homestead is still there. We could sell it, pay what you owe." "It's not that simple," Thomas interrupted, a flash of the old intensity in his eyes. "Harrison doesn't just want money, he wants control. The men who work for him don't just leave, Catherine, they can't. There must be a way," Catherine insisted. "Now that I know you're alive, now that I've found you, you don't understand the danger," Thomas cut in, glancing nervously toward the door. "If Harrison learns I have a wife, a homestead, he'll use that against me. He'll send men to claim it against my debt. He'll bring you into his web, just like he's done with the families of other men who have crossed him." "I'm not afraid of Harrison," Catherine declared, chin lifting in defiance. A harsh laugh escaped Thomas. "Then you should be. The man has killed for less than what I owe him." Catherine fell silent, studying her husband's face. The Thomas she had married had been confident, steadfast, a man who faced challenges head-on. This Thomas seemed beaten down, fearful in a way that disturbed her deeply. "What happened to you in Wyoming?" she asked softly. "The truth, Thomas." "I deserve that much." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that made Catherine's heart ache with recognition. "I delivered the herd as planned," he began haltingly. "Got a fair price too, was set to head home with enough profit to see us through winter and then some." He paused, visibly struggling with the next part. "There was a game in the hotel where I was staying, high stakes. I wasn't planning to play, just watch, but then—" His voice trailed off. "Then," Catherine prompted gently, "a man was cheating," Thomas continued. "I saw it plain as day. He was working with one of the dealers, signaling about the cards. They were fleecing a young rancher, couldn't have been more than 20. The kid was losing everything his family had sent him with." Catherine could see where this was heading. "So you stepped in?" Thomas nodded grimly. "Called out the cheater. There was a fight. I got the worst of it." His hand unconsciously touched the scar on his jaw. "Woke up in a cell charged with assault and destruction of property. The cheater had friends in the local law, and the money, our money." Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Gone, taken to pay for damages while I was unconscious." Bitterness laced Thomas's words. "When I was released a week later, I had nothing, no money to get home, no way to replace the funds I'd lost. I took odd jobs, tried to save enough for the journey back, but winter was coming on fast." He looked away, the shame evident in his posture. "That's when I met Harrison. He was passing through with some of his men, offered me a job on the spot room, board and wages. Said I could work through winter, head home in spring with enough to make up for what I'd lost. But spring came and went," Catherine said softly. "By then, I discovered the truth about Harrison's operation," Thomas confirmed. "No one leaves without paying their investment back to Harrison, the cost of hiring you, feeding you, housing you. The terms change constantly. The debt grows instead of shrinks. And you couldn't write to warn me. All correspondence goes through Harrison's men," Thomas explained. "I tried once early on, was caught, spent 2 weeks in Harrison's private jail for the offense." His eyes met hers directly for the first time. "He made it clear that if I tried to contact anyone again, he'd send men to find out who I was writing to. I couldn't risk leading him to you." Catherine absorbed this, her mind working rapidly. If what Thomas said was true, and the fear in his eyes convinced her it was, then her presence here had already put them both in danger. "How much do you owe?" she asked practically. Thomas named a sum that made Catherine's breath catch. It was more than their homestead was worth, more than they could hope to raise even if they sold everything they owned. There has to be a way, she insisted, unwilling to accept defeat now that she had found him. We'll think of something, Thomas, together. Catherine, Thomas said, his voice gentling. My brave, stubborn Catherine, you shouldn't have come, but God help me, I'm glad to see your face. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her cheek with infinite tenderness. I've thought of you every day, dreamed of you every night. Catherine leaned into his touch, tears threatening. Then come home, she whispered. Find a way, fight if you have to. It's not just about the money anymore, Thomas admitted, his voice dropping even lower. Harrison's suspects, I know too much about his operation, the illegal parts. The parts that would interest a federal marshal. He keeps me close because he doesn't trust what I'd do if I got free. A chill ran through Catherine. What have you seen? Enough to hang him, Thomas replied grimly. Cattle rustling is just the beginning. There's been murder, Catherine. Men who tried to leave, who threatened to expose him. They have a saying on the flying H. Harrison's men ride out, but they don't all ride back. The sound of voices approaching the back door made them both tense. Thomas stepped away from Catherine quickly, his expression closing off. You need to go, he urged. Now, before anyone sees us together. I'm not leaving Silver Creek without you, Catherine stated firmly. Damn it, woman, this isn't a discussion, Thomas hissed, fear making his voice harsh. If Harrison's men find out who you are, then we'll have to make sure they don't, Catherine interrupted. At least not until we've figured out a plan. The door began to open. Without another word, Thomas pushed Catherine behind a stack of crates, shielding her from view as two cowboys emerged, already deep in conversation about a card game inside. They nodded to Thomas as they passed, taking no special notice of him as they rounded the corner of the building. Once they were gone, Catherine emerged from her hiding place, her heart racing. The man inside, Cole Wilson, she said quickly. He seems to know about Harrison. He might be able to help. Thomas's expression darkened. Wilson, you've been talking to Cole Wilson. He's been helping me look for you, Catherine explained, surprised by his reaction. He knew about Harrison's methods, how he keeps men in debt. Catherine, listen to me very carefully, Thomas said, gripping her shoulders. Cole Wilson is Harrison's right-hand man, his fixer. He handles problems for Harrison, the kind of problems that sometimes don't survive the handling. If he's been helping you, it's because he wants something. Cold fear washed over Catherine as she remembered how easily Cole had offered his assistance, how he had known exactly where to find Thomas. He said he was in town on business for a lawyer. Thomas laughed without humor. The only law Wilson respects is Harrison's. Whatever he told you was a lie. But why would he help me find you, then warn me about approaching you? Catherine asked, confused. It makes no sense. I don't know, Thomas admitted, his brow furrowing. But we can't trust him. We can't trust anyone associated with Harrison. The realization of her vulnerability, of how easily she might have been manipulated by Cole, left Catherine shaken. What do we do now? Thomas glanced toward the sky, noting the position of the sun. I need to get back inside before I'm missed. Harrison's men are supposed to return to the ranch by sunset, all of us together. And after that, there's a bunkhouse inspection at midnight, Thomas explained. After that, the guards get lax. They'll be drinking, playing cards. I might be able to slip away. Meet me at the old mining shack 2 miles east of town. Do you know it? Catherine shook her head. Ask at the livery stable for directions to the Jefferson claim, Thomas instructed. But be casual about it, say you're visiting family or something. Don't arouse suspicion. I'll be there, Catherine promised. What then? Then we run, Thomas said simply, as far and as fast as we can. But Harrison will come after us, Catherine pointed out. You said yourself, we'll figure it out, Thomas interrupted, a flash of his old determination surfacing. What matters is getting you safely away from here. Harrison won't hesitate to use you against me if he discovers who you are. A noise from inside the saloon made them both start. Go, Thomas urged. Now, and Catherine, be careful who you trust. With a last, lingering look at her husband, Catherine slipped away down the alley, her mind reeling from all she had learned. The joy of finding Thomas alive warred with the horror of his situation, and with the new fear that Cole Wilson's assistance had been anything but benevolent. Back at the boarding house, Catherine paced her small room, considering her options. If Cole Wilson was indeed Harrison's man, then returning to the saloon was out of the question. But how could she avoid him until midnight? He knew where she was staying. A knock at her door froze her in mid-step. "Mrs. Flynn," Cole's voice deceptively gentle. "Are you there?" "I wanted to make sure you were all right after speaking with your husband." Catherine remained silent, barely breathing. "Catherine," Cole tried again, the familiar use of her first name sending a chill down her spine. "I understand if you're upset. Finding him must have been quite a shock. Perhaps I could bring you some tea. We could discuss what to do next." Still, Catherine made no sound. After what seemed an eternity, she heard a sigh from the other side of the door. "Very well," Cole said finally. "I'll check on you later. Please don't do anything rash, Catherine." Harrison is not a man to be trifled with. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. Catherine exhaled slowly, her heartbeat gradually returning to normal. She needed to leave the boarding house, but how? If Cole was watching for her, simply walking out the front door would alert him to her plans. The window, then. Her room was on the second floor, overlooking the main street. Too high to jump, but perhaps. Catherine moved to the window, assessing the distance to the ground. Directly below was an awning covering the porch of the mercantile next door. If she could lower herself onto that, the drop to the ground would be manageable. Decision made, Catherine quickly gathered her few belongings into a small bundle. The sun was beginning to set. She had perhaps an hour before Thomas would be returning to the Harrison ranch, and several more before he could slip away to meet her. She eased the window open, wincing at the slight squeak of the frame. The awning below looked sturdy enough, though the angled fabric would make landing tricky. Taking a deep breath, Catherine swung her legs over the sill, grateful that her practical riding skirt allowed for such movement. With careful maneuvering, she lowered herself until she was hanging by her fingertips from the windowsill. The awning was still several feet below. There was nothing for it but to let go and hope for the best. Catherine released her grip, falling with a muffled thump onto the canvas awning. It sagged alarmingly, but held her weight. She slid awkwardly down the angled surface, landing somewhat ungracefully but safely on the ground below. A quick glance around confirmed that no one had witnessed her unorthodox exit. Catherine straightened her skirts, adjusted her bundle, and walked casually toward the livery stable at the end of the street, forcing herself not to look back at the boarding house. The stable master was a grizzled old-timer with rheumy eyes and a perpetual tobacco bulge in his cheek. He barely glanced up as Catherine entered the dim interior, the smells of hay and horse strong in the close air. "Need something, miss?" he inquired, continuing to mend a piece of tack. "Directions," Catherine replied, keeping her voice steady. "My cousin lives out by the old Jefferson claim. Said to meet him there, but I'm not familiar with these parts." The stable master spat a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby can. "Jefferson Place, been abandoned near 10 years now. Nothing out there but an old shack and bad memories." "My cousin's an odd sort," Catherine improvised. "Likes his privacy. Said the old mining shack suits him just fine." The man shrugged, apparently uninterested in her fictitious relative's eccentricities. "Take the east road out of town. 'Bout 2 miles on, you'll see a lightning-struck oak on a rise to the south. Path leads from there to the shack. Can't miss it." He eyed her critically. "Ain't a good idea for a lady to be riding out alone this time of day, though." "Oh, I won't be going until morning," Catherine lied smoothly. "Just wanted to know the way beforehand." The stable master nodded, returning to his work. "Your horse in the boarding house stable?" "Yes," Catherine confirmed, realizing with a pang that she would need to retrieve Willow without being seen. "I'll collect her when I'm ready to leave." "Suit yourself," the man replied disinterestedly. Catherine thanked him and left, her mind working furiously on the next phase of her plan. She needed supplies for the journey, food, water, perhaps a weapon. And she needed to get Willow from the small stable behind Mrs. Potter's boarding house without alerting Cole to her intentions. The general store was still open, the proprietor counting the day's receipts as Catherine entered. She purchased jerky, hardtack, coffee, and other essentials that would travel well, explaining that she was setting out on a journey the next day. If the shopkeeper found her selections or timing unusual, he gave no indication. With her supplies secured in her bundle, Catherine made her way cautiously toward the boarding house stable. The sun had set completely now, and the shadows provided welcome cover as she approached from the rear of the property. The stable boy was nowhere to be seen, likely at his own dinner, which suited Catherine's purposes perfectly. She slipped inside, relieved to find Willow exactly where she had left her that morning. "Quiet now, girl," she murmured, quickly saddling the mare and securing her bundle. "We've got a long night ahead." Leading Willow out the back way, Catherine kept to the shadows of the alleyways, gradually working her way toward the eastern edge of town. Once past the last buildings, she mounted and set off at a steady pace, the moon providing just enough light to see the road. The night was clear and cool, the vastness of the Montana sky stretching endlessly above. Under different circumstances, Catherine might have found the ride peaceful. Now, every shadow seemed to hide potential danger, every sound causing her to start and look over her shoulder. The lightning-struck oak appeared exactly as the stable master had described, its split trunk silvery in the moonlight. Catherine turned Willow onto the barely visible path, which wound through scrubby undergrowth toward a small valley beyond the rise. The Jefferson Claims abandoned shack stood in a clearing, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. No light showed from its single window, no smoke rose from its crooked chimney. It appeared utterly deserted. Catherine dismounted, tethering Willow to a stunted pine near the building. Drawing a deep breath to steady herself, she approached the shack's weathered door. "Thomas," she called softly. "Are you here?" No answer came. Of course not. It was hours yet until midnight. Thomas would still be at the Harrison Ranch, waiting for his chance to slip away unnoticed. Catherine pushed open the door, which creaked ominously on rusted hinges. The interior was dark and musty, illuminated only by shafts of moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls. A rickety table, a single chair, and a narrow cot with a threadbare blanket constituted the entire furnishings. It wasn't much, but it would serve as a hiding place until Thomas arrived. Catherine settled onto the chair, prepared for a long wait. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Catherine dozed fitfully, startling awake at every sound: the hoot of an owl, the scurrying of some small nocturnal creature, the whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. Midnight came and went. Catherine tried to remain calm, telling herself that Thomas might need to wait for the guards to become sufficiently distracted before attempting his escape. 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Catherine could no longer deny the truth. Thomas wasn't coming. Had he been caught trying to leave? Had he changed his mind? Or had Harrison's men somehow discovered their plan? One possibility, more terrible than the others, kept circling in her mind: Cole Wilson. If he was indeed Harrison's man, if he had somehow learned of their meeting place, the sound of approaching horses jerked Catherine from her bleak thoughts. She rose quickly, moving to the window to peer out cautiously. 4 riders were approaching the shack, still some distance away but moving purposefully. Even from afar, Catherine recognized Cole Wilson's distinctive posture in the lead. Cold fear gripped her. They had found her. Somehow they knew. Catherine grabbed her bundle and rushed outside to Willow. There was no time to plan, no time to think, only to act. She untethered the mare and mounted swiftly, urging the horse away from the shack in the direction opposite from the approaching riders. They spotted her immediately. Shouts rang out, followed by the thunder of hooves as they gave chase. Willow was a good horse, strong and fast, but she was carrying Catherine's weight and had already traveled miles the previous night. The pursuers' mounts were fresh, their riders determined. Catherine bent low over Willow's neck, urging her to greater speed, but the gap between them and their pursuers was steadily closing. The terrain grew rougher as they left the valley, climbing toward a ridge of rocky hills. A shot rang out a warning, flying well over Catherine's head but leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the pursuit. "Stop, Mrs. Flynn," Cole's voice carried over the pounding hooves. "We're not here to hurt you." Catherine had no intention of finding out whether his words were true. She urged Willow toward a stand of trees, hoping to lose their pursuers in the denser vegetation. It was a desperate gamble that failed almost immediately. Willow, tired and unfamiliar with the terrain, stumbled on a hidden rock. The mare recovered her footing, but the momentary falter was enough for the lead rider to close the distance. Cole Wilson drew alongside Catherine, reaching out to grasp Willow's bridle. The horse came to an abrupt halt, nearly unseating Catherine in the process. "That's quite enough running, Mrs. Flynn," Cole said, his voice calm despite the exertion of the chase. "You're only making things harder on yourself and on your husband." "Where is Thomas?" Catherine demanded, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "What have you done with him?" "Nothing yet," Cole replied, signaling to his companions to surround them, "but his fate depends largely on your cooperation." "Harrison's cooperation, you mean?" Catherine retorted bitterly. "Thomas told me who you really are, Mr. Wilson, Harrison's fixer, his hired thug." Something like respect flickered in Cole's eyes. "Your husband shouldn't have shared such information with you. It's dangerous knowledge." "Why did you help me find him?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious despite her precarious situation. "Why the pretense of concern?" Cole's mouth twisted in what might have been a rueful smile. "It wasn't entirely pretense. I was curious about the woman Thomas Flynn was so desperate to protect. 3 years he's worked for Harrison, never once mentioning a wife, never writing home. That kind of devotion is uncommon." "Where is he now?" Catherine pressed. "Enjoying Harrison's hospitality," Cole answered, his tone making it clear this was no pleasant circumstance. "He was caught trying to leave the ranch last night. Harrison was displeased." Catherine's heart constricted painfully. "Is he alive?" "For now," Cole confirmed. "Harrison prefers to make examples of men who try to escape. It's more effective than simply killing them outright. And me, am I to be an example as well?" "That depends," Cole said, suddenly businesslike. "Harrison is a businessman above all. He believes everyone and everything has a price. Your husband owes a considerable debt, one that his labor alone may never repay, but perhaps there are other assets to consider." Understanding dawned. "The homestead," Cole nodded. "Land is valuable in this territory, especially land with water rights. Harrison has been expanding his holdings eastward. Your property would be a convenient addition. And if I sign it over to him, what then?" Catherine's voice was steady despite the turmoil within. "Then Thomas Flynn's debt would be considered paid," Cole stated. "You both would be free to go with the understanding that any discussion of Harrison's business practices would be unwise. It was blackmail, pure and simple. But if it meant Thomas's freedom, his life, what choice did she have?" "I want to see my husband first," Catherine insisted, "before I agree to anything." Cole considered this, then nodded. "Harrison anticipated as much. He's prepared to grant you a meeting with Flynn under supervision, of course." "Of course," Catherine echoed bitterly. "Shall we?" Cole gestured toward the direction from which they had come. "Harrison is expecting us." With no real alternative, Catherine allowed herself to be escorted back toward Silver Creek, then past it to the sprawling Harrison Ranch. The Flying H was impressive in scale, a main house built of solid timber, numerous outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. It spoke of wealth and permanence in a territory where both were hard-won. They approached the main house, where a broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair stood waiting on the porch. Everett Harrison was older than Catherine had expected, in his 60s, perhaps, but he carried himself with the vigor of a much younger man. His eyes, keen and calculating, fixed on Catherine as she dismounted. "Mrs. Flynn," he greeted her with a courtly nod. "Welcome to the Flying H. I apologize for the rather dramatic circumstances of your arrival." "Where is my husband?" Catherine demanded, dispensing with pleasantries. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Direct and forthright, "I can see why Flynn was so determined to shield you from my attention." He gestured toward the house. "Please come inside, we have much to discuss." The interior of the Harrison home was luxurious by frontier standards, Eastern furniture, actual glass in the windows, paintings on the walls. It was the dwelling of a man who had brought civilization's comforts to the wilderness through sheer force of will. Harrison led her to a study, where he offered Catherine a seat before a massive oak desk. Cole Wilson took up position near the door, silent but watchful. "Now, Mrs. Flynn," Harrison began, settling into a leather chair behind the desk. "I understand you wish to see your husband. That can be arranged after we've come to an understanding about certain matters of business." "Mr. Wilson explained your proposition," Catherine said coldly. "My land in exchange for my husband's freedom." "Precisely," Harrison nodded approvingly. "A simple transaction, beneficial to all parties. You regain your husband, I acquire a valuable property, and the unfortunate matter of Thomas Flynn's debt is resolved cleanly." "And if I refuse?" The question was rhetorical. They both knew she couldn't refuse with Thomas's life in the balance, but Catherine needed to understand fully what they were facing. Harrison's expression hardened. "Then your husband will face the consequences of attempted desertion. In the absence of formal law in these parts, I'm afraid I must enforce discipline among my men myself. Such discipline tends to be instructive for others who might consider similar actions." The threat was unmistakable. Catherine forced herself to remain outwardly calm, though rage and fear battled within her. "I want to see Thomas now, before I sign anything." Harrison studied her for a moment, then nodded to Cole. "Bring Flynn up from the cellar, make him presentable enough for his wife's sensibilities." Cole left silently, returning some 10 minutes later with Thomas between him and another ranch hand. Catherine barely stifled a cry at the sight of her husband. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, and he moved with the stiffness of a man in considerable pain. "Catherine," he rasped, his good eye widening at the sight of her. "You shouldn't be here, you should have run." "Touching," Harrison commented dryly, "but perhaps we could proceed to business, Mrs. Flynn has a document to sign, after which you both will be free to resume your lives elsewhere, of course." Thomas's expression was anguished. "Catherine, don't. The homestead is all we have. We'll build again," she replied steadily, her eyes never leaving his. "Together." Harrison placed a document on the desk before Catherine, a deed transfer, already prepared. All that was required was her signature. "The pen, Mrs. Flynn," Harrison prompted, offering an ornate fountain pen. "One signature and this unpleasantness will be behind you both." Catherine took the pen, studying the document briefly. It was straightforward enough, the transfer of their homestead to Everett Harrison in exchange for the cancellation of all debts owed by Thomas Flynn. There were no hidden clauses, no tricks that she could discern. She placed the pen against the paper, then paused, a sudden thought occurring to her. "The hat," she said, looking up at Harrison. "My husband's hat. It still hangs by our door. I want your guarantee that we can retrieve it before you take possession of the property." Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "A hat, by all means, take it with my compliments. Cole will escort you to collect your belongings after the signing, of course." Catherine signed the document with a steady hand, then set the pen down deliberately. "It's done. Now release my husband." Harrison examined the signature, then nodded with satisfaction. "Mr. Wilson, please remove Mr. Flynn's restraints. Their debt is paid." Cole stepped forward, unlocking the handcuffs that bound Thomas's wrists. Thomas immediately moved to Catherine's side, his good arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders despite his obvious pain. "You'll want to have those injuries seen to, Flynn," Harrison observed casually. "Dr. Mercer in Silver Creek is competent enough. Consider his services my parting gift." He rose from his desk. "Now, I believe our business is concluded. Cole will escort you to your former property to collect any personal items you wish to retain. You have until sundown tomorrow to vacate completely." "And after that?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "After that, you would be trespassing on Flying H property," Harrison replied mildly. "Something I don't advise. However, provided you maintain a discreet silence about your time in my employ, you needn't fear further attention from me or my men." It was dismissal and warning combined. Catherine and Thomas were led outside, where horses had been prepared for them, Willow for Catherine and a sturdy bay for Thomas. Cole Wilson mounted his own horse, prepared to accompany them as promised. The journey to their homestead took most of the day. Thomas rode in grim silence, the pain of his injuries evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. Catherine kept pace beside him, her emotions too complex for words. They had lost everything yet gained back what mattered most. Cole maintained a respectful distance, neither intruding on their privacy nor letting them out of his sight. His role as Harrison's enforcer was not yet complete. He would ensure they left the territory as agreed. The sight of their homestead, nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains, brought a lump to Catherine's throat. The small cabin, the barn, the garden she had tended so carefully, all soon to belong to Harrison, absorbed into his ever-expanding empire. "Home," Thomas murmured, the single word laden with regret. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't been such a fool in Wyoming." "Don't," she interrupted gently. "What's done is done. We're together now, that's what matters." They dismounted outside the cabin. Cole remained on his horse, giving them the illusion of privacy while maintaining his watchful presence. "I'll wait here," he said. "Take what you need, but remember only what you can carry on horseback." Inside, the cabin was exactly as Catherine had left it days earlier, neat, modest, filled with the small comforts they had accumulated during their years together. And there, on the peg by the door, hung Thomas's hat, dusty but intact, waiting just as she had waited. Thomas stared at it, emotion working in his battered face. "You really did keep it," he said softly. "All this time." "Of course I did," Catherine replied, reaching up to take the hat from its peg. She dusted it off with care and quiet respect, the familiar motions both comforting and bittersweet. "It was yours. I always believed you would come back for it someday." She held it out to him. Thomas took it reverently, turning it in his hands as though reacquainting himself with an old friend. Then, with a decisive movement, he placed it on his head. It fit perfectly, as though the 3 years of separation had never happened. With the hat in place, Thomas seemed to straighten, some of his old confidence returning despite his injuries. "Where will we go?" Catherine asked as they began gathering the few belongings they could take with them: clothes, mementos, the tools of survival on the frontier. "West," Thomas decided after a moment's thought. "Oregon, maybe, or California, somewhere Harrison's reach doesn't extend, somewhere we can start fresh." Catherine nodded, practical despite the ache of leaving the home they had built together. "We have a little money saved. It's not much, but it will get us started." They worked in companionable silence, selecting what to take and what to leave behind. Each item considered was a memory, each choice a small grief. Yet beneath the sorrow of loss ran a current of hope. They were together again, alive, with the future still before them. As sunset approached, they stepped outside with their meager belongings packed and secured to their horses. Cole Wilson waited patiently, his expression unreadable as he observed their farewell to the homestead. "Time to go," he said simply. "I'll escort you as far as the territorial border." Thomas nodded stiffly, helping Catherine mount before climbing somewhat painfully onto his own horse. With a last, lingering look at their cabin silhouetted against the evening sky, they turned their horses westward. The journey to the territorial border took 3 days of steady riding. Thomas's injuries slowed their pace, but with each passing mile, the shadow of Harrison's influence seemed to recede. Cole Wilson remained a constant presence, neither friendly nor hostile, simply carrying out his assigned task with professional detachment. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a rise overlooking a broad valley. A river marked the border between territories, gleaming silver in the sunlight. "This is where I leave you," Cole announced, reining in his horse. "Beyond the river, you're out of Harrison's territory. Keep moving west for at least a week before you consider stopping." Thomas regarded him with a mixture of wariness and reluctant gratitude. "Why are you telling us this? Your job was just to see us across the border." Cole's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I admire what I've seen these past few days. Not many women would ride alone into unknown danger for a husband gone 3 years. Not many men would endure what you did to protect someone they love." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he tossed to Thomas. "This might help you start over." Thomas opened the pouch cautiously, his eyes widening at the sight of gold coins within. "Why?" he asked again, clearly baffled by this unexpected generosity from Harrison's enforcer. "Consider it compensation for the land," Cole replied. Harrison got it too cheaply. This makes the transaction more equitable. Won't Harrison miss it? Catherine asked. A hint of a smile touched Cole's lips. Harrison has many sources of income. Some are more carefully accounted for than others. With that cryptic statement, he touched his hat in farewell and turned his horse back the way they had come. Thomas and Catherine watched him go, bewildered by this final encounter with a man who had been both adversary and unexpected ally. "Do you trust him?" Catherine asked as Cole's figure grew smaller in the distance. "No," Thomas answered honestly, "but I don't think he means us harm, not anymore." They forded the river before making camp that night, symbolically placing themselves beyond Harrison's reach. As darkness fell, they sat beside their small fire, the vastness of the frontier stretching before them unknown, challenging but full of possibility. "I still can't believe you came for me," Thomas said, his arm around Catherine's shoulders as they watched the flames dance. After 3 years of silence, most women would have given up, declared themselves widows, moved on with their lives. "Most women didn't marry Thomas Flynn," Catherine replied with a small smile. "And most women didn't have a hat to dust every morning, reminding them of a promise unfulfilled." Thomas's hand moved to touch the brim of his hat, now back where it belonged. "I made you a lot of promises when we married. I've broken most of them through my own foolishness. Then make me new ones," Catherine suggested, turning to face him, "promises for our new life." Thomas considered this, his expression solemn in the firelight. "I promise to be worthy of the faith you've shown in me," he said finally. "I promise never to gamble with our future again. And I promise," his voice caught slightly, "I promise never to leave you wondering where I am or if I'm coming back." Catherine placed her hand against his cheek, careful of his healing injuries. "I promise to believe in those promises," she said softly, "and to remind you of them whenever you need reminding." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since finding him in Silver Creek. Despite his bruises, despite all they had endured and lost, it was the smile of the man she had married 6 years ago. They sealed their renewed promises with a kiss beside the campfire, the stars of the western sky bearing witness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new territories to cross, new lives to build. But tonight, they had reclaimed what mattered most each other, and the bond that had survived 3 years of separation and uncertainty. As Thomas held her close, Catherine felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since the day he rode away. They had lost their homestead, but they had found their way back to each other. In the vast wilderness of the American frontier, they had rediscovered home in its truest sense. And Thomas Flynn's hat, once again atop his head where it belonged, stood as testament to a faith rewarded and a love that had weathered the harshest of storms. Spring arrived in Oregon's Willamette Valley with an explosion of green that still took Catherine's breath away, even after 5 years of witnessing the transformation. The farm they had established with Cole Wilson's unexpected gold 40 acres of rich soil with a view of distant mountains was bursting with new life as crops pushed through the earth and fruit trees blossomed in their small orchard. Standing on the porch of their sturdy timber house, Catherine watched Thomas in the barnyard, teaching their 4-year-old son Jackson how to feed the chickens without frightening them into a fluttering panic. Their daughter Emma, just turned 2, clung to her father's leg, her copper hair so like Catherine's own gleaming in the morning sunshine. Thomas caught Catherine's eye and smiled, tipping his hat, the same hat that had hung for 3 years on a peg in Montana, waiting for its owner's return. Though weathered by time and travel, it remained his most treasured possession, a tangible reminder of all they had endured and overcome. They had found their place here in this fertile valley, among neighbors who valued hard work and asked few questions about the past. Thomas's skills as a horseman had earned him respect in the community, while Catherine's garden produced vegetables that commanded top prices at the local market. Harrison's name was never spoken between them, though occasionally news from Montana territory would reach them through travelers or newspapers. The cattle baron's empire continued to grow, absorbing smaller ranches and homesteads just as he had absorbed theirs. But distance and time had dulled the sting of that loss, replacing it with appreciation for what they had gained. "Mama," Jackson called, running toward her with cupped hands. "Look what I found in the chicken coop." Catherine knelt to examine her son's treasure, a perfect blue egg, still warm from the nest. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. It will make a fine breakfast tomorrow." Thomas approached with Emma in his arms, his limp a permanent reminder of Harrison's discipline, barely noticeable after years of healing. "I was thinking we might ride into town this afternoon," he suggested. "Jackson's boots are getting tight and we could use some sugar." "That sounds perfect," Catherine agreed, rising to accept Emma from his arms. "Perhaps we could visit the mercantile afterward. I heard they received a shipment of books from back east." Their life was simple, but rich, built on the promises they had renewed beside that campfire at the territorial border 5 years earlier. Thomas had kept his word, never again gambling with their future, never leaving Catherine to wonder where he was or when he would return. Each morning, he would place his hat on its peg by the door before joining his family for breakfast. Each evening, Catherine would dust it off with the same care and quiet respect she had shown during those long years of separation. It had become a ritual between them, a daily reminder of what they had almost lost and what they had fought to reclaim. As they prepared for their trip to town, Catherine watched Thomas lift Jackson onto the wagon seat, his movements strong and sure. The broken man she had found in Silver Creek was gone, replaced by the husband she had always believed in, steadfast, dependable, filled with purpose and joy. "Ready?" Thomas asked, offering his hand to help her up beside him, Emma securely in her lap. Catherine took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses against her palm. "Ready," she confirmed with a smile. Thomas squeezed her fingers gently before releasing them to take up the reins. As the wagon rolled down their tree-lined drive toward the main road, Catherine leaned against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that they had not merely survived their ordeal, they had transcended it, building something stronger and more enduring from its ashes. The road stretched before them, leading to town and back home again, a simple journey that represented everything they had fought for. The freedom to come and go as they pleased, to build a life on their own terms, to raise their children in peace and security. And if, occasionally, Catherine caught Thomas gazing eastward with a distant look in his eyes, she understood. The past could never be entirely forgotten, but it could be forgiven, its lessons incorporated into the fabric of their lives without allowing its shadows to darken their present joy. As the wagon crested a small rise, revealing the patchwork of farms and the cluster of buildings that made up their new community, Thomas turned to Catherine with a smile that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "I love you," he said simply. "Every day, I thank whatever fortune or providence led you to find me when I thought I was lost forever." "It wasn't fortune," Catherine replied, shifting Emma to a more comfortable position. "It was faith and a hat that needed dusting." Thomas laughed, a free, unencumbered sound that echoed across the valley. With a gentle slap of the reins, he urged their horses forward, carrying the family they had created toward the future they continued to build, one day, one choice, one promise kept at a time.